Absolutely. So, in thinking about geography from Children's House to middle school, I was going back through some of her written words, and also I think we were all kind of going through our albums just thinking about it in terms of a continuum. And to me, geography really symbolizes, almost more than any other subject to me, what Montessori was really about, and that is tying all the curriculum together into a single story. I won't make you read this whole quote. If you've ever read Montessori or tried to pull a quote from her, it's exceedingly difficult to do. She was long-winded at best. But I think one of the most important parts of this quote is here. This is from To Educate the Human Potential, which is one of her first books to really elaborate into the elementary years. And so she says, "The sun, the earth, the stones, and life of all kinds from a whole in relation to each other, and so close is this relation that we cannot understand a stone without some understanding of the great sun. No matter what we touch, an atom or a cell, we cannot explain it without knowledge of the wide universe." So to me, in geography or any subject that we do, this is really kind of one of the ultimate goals of a Montessori education, is to understand everything, not only in and of itself, but its relation to other things as well. And I think geography is the perfect example of that. And I hope, if nothing else, you'll see tonight from Children's House through middle school how that whole complete picture is hopefully, our goal is to give that to the child and to let them explore within the context of that, to really answer those big questions of who am I, where do I fit in, and what is my cosmic task. And so that, I think, kind of sets up the whole curriculum.
I'm going to be starting talking about the Children's House geography curriculum. These are photos from my classroom, my children exploring the geography curriculum. You'll note that they're all touching something. It's all hands-on, concrete materials. So one of the core qualities of Montessori materials at the Children's House level is that they are concrete. They are easy to manipulate by the young child. It's all very attractive, beautiful. I mean, from every level that's the case, particularly so at the Children's House level. When children are learning, they are literally absorbing everything in their environment around them. And the tactile experience of the materials is really powerful at that age in particular. So with math materials, it's really easy to see how Maria Montessori made math like such a concrete thing. Like, have you all seen like the golden beads in the classrooms, mm-hmm. right? Those are just so beautiful, and I can hold one bead in one hand and 1,000 beads in the other, and like, I get it. 1,000 is bigger than one. But what about a concept that is so much vaster and more abstract and that couldn't possibly be contained inside the walls of my classroom? Like, how do I approach this idea of geography that's like the whole world? So Maria Montessori, like with every material she designed and invented, she did a beautiful job translating really abstract concepts into the concrete for a child to hold and grasp and have a sensorial impression of. So I just want to share a few of those with you today and give you a sense of how we approach geography at this age level. So the first materials that I want to share with you, these are our globes. They're always available to the child to take down, to spin, to touch. This is called the sandpaper globe. What I love about Montessori is just how accessible she made all her materials to children, regardless of their learning style. This spins, it has texture. I can feel the difference between land and water on this globe. Land is rough and water is smooth. So it starts to help the child delineate the differences between, the two, in addition to air, the building blocks of all life on Earth. And then we transition at some point to the colored globe. Every continent is a different color. And this is really notable to me because this color coding will be present in the rest of the geography curriculum. It's a really nice way to kind of sort and classify the world. North America will be orange when we look at photos of North America. Materials that originate from North America, that we will use this color to help the child begin sorting and processing what part of the globe we're talking about. This also plays a really sweet role. Have you all been to a children's house birthday celebration before? Has a child held this globe and walked around it? Yeah, so I love that. I think that's great. Birthdays are kind of a complicated thing. Like, what does that mean? You're all singing at me and looking at me, and I'm what? I don't feel any different. I love the fact that a child makes a little path around the sun for every year of their life, and every path around the sun is accompanied by a story about that year of their life. So I'm a big fan of the globes, and we see, again, like a really kind of linear, logical progression to our puzzle maps. So as you can see, that color coding is still in place, but now the pieces come out, and we can touch. There we go. All the individual pieces of the map and start to learn the names of the continents and where they fit in the world. There's so many games we play with these. For example, we can put them all in a bag, reach your hand in the bag and try to feel just by touch what continent you're holding. I wish I had done this as a child. Oh my goodness, I still am shaky about where Indiana is in relation to Ohio. Then the last little component of the curriculum that I'd like to share with you today are the land and water forms. So again, a sensorial, tactile experience of topography. You can see that these are the inverse images of each other, right? So lake, island, we form this relationship between the two. And a lake is water with land all around, while an island is land. Wait, did I mess that up? Oh, you get where I'm going with this. And I love that we begin to build that relationship between land and water in a really fun way. Children actually fill these up with water. It's messy, it's fun, it's engaging, and we introduce vocabulary to go with it. Who doesn't want to learn the word archipelago or isthmus? And those are complicated words, and it's easy to introduce them when we can accompany it with such a fun activity. And then we can connect these with a series of photos, books, that allow them to kind of delve deeper into what an island is versus what a lake is, who lives on islands, what do people do around lakes, things like that. I've far exceeded my time. It's all you, Jen Case, take the stage.
So Kate shared with you the physical geography that we do in the Children's House classroom. I'm going to go into more of the cultural, political part, political meaning cultural stories, that is. And we just want to make sure that the child has that understanding of his world. And I apologize if I use his versus hers or hers versus his too much ahead of time, so I'm just going to probably head to one or the other, so I'll apologize now. But each Montessori classroom all over the world begins with a rich experience of the culture in which he lives. So we want to offer, I found a very short Montessori quote, and that is, give the world to the small child. And so what we want to do is we want to give the child something they can hold on to. So they've experienced the globes, they've experienced the maps. So we've gone from this large concept and we're starting to now come to more specific. So some of the options, I just randomly chose South America. So here we have a piece from the world map of South America, which most children will say this is Hudson, because they live in Hudson and that is the whole world to them. So trying to help them to understand that South America is a different place. And there are different animals that live in South America. You won't find a crocodile walking down to Lulu's. So that's their experience, that they see the squirrels and they see all that's around them. And we want them to be able to say squirrel, red-winged blackbird. We want that language in their vocabulary. But now we want to expand it out to crocodile. And as Huck stated, it's across the curriculum. So there's language involved. This would be for the older child who's experienced this as a young child, just matching the crocodile to South America. Well, now we want to read the word, and we see the word South America. We learn the name of the continents. Once again, there's some amazing books that will bring the child into the culture of a specific area. The culture folders are so much fun. When it comes to sharing culture, you become a storyteller. And if you can capture the imagination and interest of a child, that story will just resonate with them. And if you pull out a card and has your dad ever had a flat tire or maybe needed an oil change? Where do they go? They go to a service station, and we start talking about that. I found a picture of a service station in South America. I wonder if this looks like the service station that your dad went to. And they might, no, that's not what it looked like, but they do the same thing there. Well, let's see what else we can find. And we share these stories. And I'll sit with them and go through them. And before I know it, I may start off with 2 or 3 children. Half the class will be there by the time we get through the entire folder. And on another day, I'll see a younger child sitting there pulling out a picture. Did you know that mountains have snow on top of that? And now they're sharing the story with the exact passion, if not more, with the friend who missed the story of South America. So and they may make up their own story, and that's fine, because they look at the picture and they can read the beauty in the picture. Sometimes we have objects from that continent, and when you travel and you take your child with you and you tell us, especially in children's house, and speaking from a children's house perspective, we're going to be gone for a month to India, or we're going to be gone to a month to wherever. What kind of homework should they do? From a children's house perspective, I'll say none. You want that child to experience the culture and do whatever you want them to remember. If you go to a special temple or to a special park or to a restaurant, if it's meaningful to that child, take a picture and capture that memory so they can bring that picture back and share it with us. If there's a small object that will fit in your suitcase and pass customs, we love having little objects come back into the classroom, and it's special for that child to share it with us as well. But also don't be surprised if their favorite part of the trip is the airplane. Even though you saw the Grand Canyon, it's all about the airplane. But, what do you think this might be? This looks like a stick, doesn't it? Why is there a stick in our box? This is a special stick from the cactus plant in Chile. And it's believed to be made by drying out the cactus plant, and they remove all the spines. Do you know what spines are? Spines are like needles. They poke, right? Well, they dry out the needles and they push them through the cactus, and then they fill it with little pebbles and close it off. And oops, when you turn it, it sounds like rain. And they believed if you use this instrument, it would help thunderstorms to come and water your crops. It's an interesting instrument, isn't it? This is from the coast of South America, from the country of Chile. And it's as short and simple as that. The rain stick is placed on a tray and left. When dust accumulates on it, it tells us it is no longer of interest to the child. We will put it away and pick a new object from a new continent. And that is just a snippet of culture in the children's house classroom.
So, switching gears a little, we're going to talk about what happens when the children reach lower elementary. So, each year, when the children move up, which is a new plane of development now, I think probably one of the biggest things is we try to make sure we're sparking their imagination, because they're really interested in big things. So we tell Maria Montessori's first great lesson, which we call the In the Beginning story. So it's all about how our whole, not Ohio began, but how our whole universe began, which is a really big story. So it gives them an appreciation for the interdependence of all matter, and then everything in the world's and the universe's cosmic task. And it leads them then to think about big things, to experiment with and learn about the laws of nature. So they might learn from some of the charts that we do during the story about how hot air would rise. So one of the impressionistic charts shows figures that look like they might be angels, and they're carrying hot particles up into the atmosphere, and then the atmosphere is cold, and then everything, the cold particles fall back down. So hot things rise and cold things fall, and this is how, in the beginning, the earth cooled. All right? So it gives them both an impressionistic lesson, plus teaches them sort of the beginning science experiment behind it. Also, some of our experiments during the story are about particles that are attracted to each other, and what happens then. What do we call those states of matter? And then that sometimes begins to lead us to the study of how big objects began to form together in the beginning, like the planets and the constellations. So there's a chart that shows them all the planets and their sizes and how far away they are from the sun. So it's certainly a big picture. So all of these things, right, illustrate the immenseness of space, the broader universe, our solar system, which they can study, and then eventually leads us to the study of the continents, which they learned about when they were in Children's House.
And then they start to study the continents more in depth. So I'll gather a group of students, and let's say we're studying a certain continent and we're spending a lot of time studying it, and in many different ways. I'll gather a group of students, and they'll take the continent and they'll decide which country that they want to study more in depth. And they'll all decide on a country together, and then we look together at this chart, the fundamental needs of all humans. And we talk about how all humans have the same needs, but they're met in different ways depending on where they live and what continent they live on. So they use this chart to help them think of a more specific topic to research. So someone might decide, oh wow, I'm interested in clothing from that country. And so they'll take some time to look through all the books and learn in general about the country they chose, but then they'll do a more specific research on clothing, or if someone else decides to do defense. Some people are really interested in sports, so they decide to do sports from that country, or what have I seen? A big one is animals. It's not on the fundamental needs, but they love to research the animals from that country. So they all choose a topic, and then they fill out a graphic organizer, and they write a first draft, and it gets edited. Then they make a final draft, and they sew it into a book. And then, as you can see up here, they get to gather together and think about a recipe from the country that they researched and cook. And they love it. And it helps with measuring, and they like cutting, fine motor skills. It just, like what Huck said, it involves so much. So this is some pictures of them cooking. And then, once they've done all their research, they practice presenting. And they work on speaking in front of a crowd and holding their paper low down so we can see their face. And it's just a really exciting experience to share with everyone.
So this tells a little bit about how people, right, lived in different parts of continents and countries. But we also take the time to study all the political parts of the continents. So one way we can do it is by using the puzzle maps. in drawing a big map that way, tracing the parts or labeling the countries. Or we can use in elementary something called, I'll try to lift this without dropping all the pins, a pin map. And it's just like its name suggests, there's little flags, and each map of the continent has the opportunity to learn the names of the countries within the continent, the major cities and capitals within the continent, and the land and water forms. So one pin map can give everyone the experience of a lot of different elements in each little pin. You have to really work hard to find exactly where that goes. And then you could translate that to a map and label it the way you would like. So then they're learning the actual names of the different places around the world, and the water forms and the land forms. And also, we sometimes teach them or encourage them or show them how they can do a physical map of a continent. So then they can explore where the deserts might be and where the rivers are and label them. And so pin maps, and then there's an example of a basic physical map. So it's kind of interesting for them because they can put together some of the facts they learned about the animals and where people live in those places because of what the environment is like. So as we said, we're kind of putting a lot of different things together. And then on the floor is a world map that shows land and water forms. So we were challenged ourselves because there's a lot of land and water forms around the world. So there's a good control for it. You can look at the back and see which continent that it's talking about, and children can practice learning a lot of different places all around the globe.
Who needs Google Maps?
Yeah, who needs?
And you can see the colors are still the same
Oh,
in
that's right.
elementary.
Good, thanks, I forgot that, yeah. Perfect.
Okay, excuse me.
Bigger portions.
Okay, so in upper elementary, it's really a 3-year sequence that the students go through from 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So in 4th grade, we begin the year really studying, they've been working with so many maps, but now we begin to study how to read and use maps in their research. So that includes working with scale. So again, cross-curricular here, they're measuring, they're converting inches and centimeters into miles and kilometers. They have to do math, and they're learning about the different names of cities, and they're planning world vacations. And so this is just a really good example of introducing multiple concepts into geography as well. They'll also work with map legends. They'll learn about direction, the cardinal directions in different directions. And they'll also learn latitude and longitude as well. So this is really just how to use a map as well. And congruently with this, they will also be working on making political maps making their own political maps of all of the continents. And so you can see that we're progressively, whereas before it was large puzzle pieces, now it's pins, and now they're actually creating them, the maps themselves. So it's kind of a gradual increase in the difficulty and what we're asking of them. And what's cool about 4th grade too is that this is really a year-long project that from the political maps, and then later as you'll see some of the bio maps, at the end of the year they get to take all of the work they did and they go and they've created their own atlas themselves. And so that's just a really nice thing that the 4th graders do that's really a year-long and really stretches back even back into Children's House of the accomplishment that they've done in geography. The second half of 4th grade is really dedicated to the study of biomes. So this is an intensive study that will go continent by continent. And the first thing they'll be presented with, and again, I think it's important to note, just because I think it's really speaks to how thoughtful Montessori was in her delineation, is again, all of the continents go back to the very first maps that they've had since they were in Children's House, the color coordination. So they'll first be presented with the different biomes of each continent. And they will, their first work with this will be they have cards similar to this, and they'll have to label the different physical features, rivers, mountains, important landmarks of the continent. And then what they'll do is they will then go to creating their own. So we have these beautiful stencils that they'll work with. that has the outline of the continent, the outline of the rivers, and they will use this to create their own biomaps of those continents. And then after that, what they'll do, after creating their maps, is they'll spend another week then researching. So for instance, this is the biome of tropical rainforest. So let's say for Africa, they were interested in studying tropical rainforest, that biome. What's nice about these research cards is that every single, across all of the continents and across all of the biomes, they hit all the same areas. So every single one will talk about a flora from that area. So they'll talk about a coniferous and a deciduous tree, and it'll also talk about a flowering plant. They will always talk about an arthropod. They'll always talk about one fish, one amphibian, one bird, and one mammal. So the things that we're studying in biology are congruent across curriculum, so that they're studying those same things in geography as well. And what I also love about this material is that it also includes the fundamental needs of humans within the study of the ecosystem itself. So it's not separating humans into a separate category. It's saying, how do the humans interact? How are we a part of the ecosystem, just as the animals, the plants are as well? And so it really ties, and it doesn't separate humans as a distinction of the ecosystem. It's that we are part of the ecosystem as well. So they're learning about other cultures as well. And just as the fundamental needs in lower L, they're learning about how do the humans in this ecosystem of the world, how do they satisfy their needs for transportation? How do they satisfy their needs for recreation, or for ceremony, or for clothing, or for eating, and all of those different things as well. And so this research will turn into some type of project. It could be a cultural cooking. This is when I usually introduce fourth graders to PowerPoint, and so that's usually what they end up doing for a whole year, because they love. Ed Baker can attest to this. Eva's one of our PowerPoint aficionados. But yeah, so, and this is another opportunity, just as in lower L, to share with the rest of the students what they learned about that ecosystem. Another great thing about this is that for, let's say for Africa, they might not study every biome in Africa. But by being presented from all the different biomes in Africa, they're learning about all of them. They're teaching each other about all the different ecosystem in that continent. And between all the continents, they will study every single ecosystem at least once over the course of their fourth grade year. In fifth grade really begins with the study of human geography. So we start a lot with population, and we start with population growth over time. How did we go from, how did we increase in 8 billion people over the last 200 years? And so it really ties in history, the Industrial Revolution, the Medical Revolution, and all these things. And then we look at human population by continent. So this is a great example. This is the first time they may have made their own pie chart. And if you've never made a pie chart from scratch, it's a lot of math. This is the first time that they are introduced to maybe working with decimals and converting percents into degrees and measuring that on a pie chart. And it also just, as they're doing all this work, every single one of them will have the realization, the very tactile realization, like, holy cow, there's a lot of people in Asia. And so, and everyone's always amazed, wow, North America is not that big of a chunk of the world. So this is really just a first introduction to realizing how, how many people there are in the world, and the human spread on the world. And then in the end of fifth grade, we'll do a real in-depth research into the different major world religions. So we'll look at the timeline of religion, so we'll look at it chronologically, and then we'll also do a deep dive into each religion, and the students will study that religion. They'll study the basic tenets of that religion, the important texts of that religion, how they worship, the important holidays, and then they'll also turn that into some type of, typically this is a really good chance for them to do something artistic. So this was a student who was studying Buddhism, and she was really into meditation, and so you can see here she did an artistic representation of how she feels when she meditates, and then also up here she was talking about the wheel of Dharma in Buddhism, and so the 8 rules of Buddhism. If you go to the next slide, I thought this was a really cool rendition. We were studying the 3 major religions of China, so Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, and this was a student who was looking at all of the ways in which these are related, in which they're different, and then this was a graphic way of him representing the 3 different major religions of China. And so this was just a good, I think, representation of some of the artistic abilities that can be brought. In 6th grade, we really study and focus on economic geography. So we'll start by looking at economic terms. What does GDP stand for? What does it mean? How do we calculate it? What's the difference between GDP and GDP per capita? And what are these statistics really telling us? We'll look at imports and exports. So this is an import and export map. So you can see this student looks like he chose Greece. And so he found the 5 top imports and where they're going in the world from Greece, and also the top exports, to Greece, and then the top exports from Greece and what those were. They'll also study poverty and wealth around the world. Many times this leads to a service project. One thing your students might be coming home with tomorrow is a UNICEF box for trick-or-treating. So that's something that the 6, for instance, this year decided they want to do. They were learning about world poverty. They were presented with the opportunity to do a service project, and so they chose to take on organizing for the whole school a fundraiser for UNICEF. This is really an opportunity as they're reaching the end of Upper L and towards adolescence of expanding beyond Hudson Montessori and seeing themselves not only as members of this community, but members of the larger whole as well. And then the end of the year in 6th grade geography, we also talk a lot more about the more technical aspects of ecology, environmental science, and forestry and ecosystem as well. So we'll talk about very specific, more scientific terms about ecology, about forestry, water cycle, nitrogen cycle, food webs, and things like this. And then also at the end of 6th grade, we focus back on world religions, and instead of studying it in the classroom, those same world religions that we did in 5th grade, this time the students have to organize and plan their own trips to a place of worship from that religion. So for instance, one group might be in charge of contacting and organizing a trip to a synagogue, or to a Catholic church, or wherever we're studying, or if we can't get there, we'll bring someone from that faith into the classroom, and so they're learning it in a more hands-on way. And they're also, the hope is that they're getting out of the classroom and into the actual broader community and into the real world. And this is an example of students creating their own timeline of world religions. So they're taking all the information that they've learned about the world religions and putting it in their own format. And I believe that's it.
When Maria Montessori wrote about adolescence and what an adolescent program should involve in terms of academic learning, she wrote that basically these are the sciences and the geography and the history and culture that adolescents should be exposed to over the course of 6 years, from 12 to 18. And then she listed every single science, every single aspect of geography, and every era of human history imaginable. So it's a very wide scope to work with. But one thing that we know that she really valued from her writings, and she especially focused on this when she wrote about adolescence, is how much she emphasized the importance of place. And when she wrote about adolescence, she really emphasized how important it is that an environment for adolescents focuses on the actual land that they are on, that they need a connection, a direct experiential connection with where they are at in their own place, in their own time. And that all science and all culture, all geography, everything that they need to learn will arise from that land that they are being connected with. So it's when you're faced with the task of how do we cover geography in a middle school program, it's big. It's a big scope to work with. But essentially, in our 2-year program in the middle school, geography, this has been touched on a little bit, but it fits into 3 basic categories. So there's physical geography, human geography, and environmental geography. And these 3 branches of geography are woven into almost every other aspect of our curriculum in a very integrated, interdisciplinary way. So for earth sciences, for physical geography. They get a lot of this in earth sciences and studying the formation and processes of the earth, and studying the properties of soil, and right now they're studying the properties of water. They get through that a lot. And then physical geography also involves physical and digital mapping in the middle school, which happens most often in humanities studies and in trip planning. You know, Huck talked about the trips they plan in 6th grade for religious studies and going out to places of worship. When they get to the middle school, they're planning trips to New York City, to Washington, D.C., to West Virginia. They're mapping out their walking routes so that when they get there, they actually they take turns leading the entire class on the walking routes, the paths that we take, while giving presentations on the major things that we are seeing. Physical geography also appears in math, and I'll show an example of that here in a moment. With human geography, these are things like cultural and political studies, which happens frequently in the humanities, and also through the literature in the arts. And then there's environmental geography, which is seen most frequently in the sciences. In the middle school program, through environmental sciences, we look into biomes again, we look into biodiversity, we look into climate, and students study these in detail, and also the interaction between humans and the environment, how we affect the environment, and also how the environment affects us. That comes a lot through their environmental sciences and the humanities, again, and even through language arts, because they have debates on certain topics related to these things, and they write persuasive essays related to environmental geography. When it comes to geography in the middle school, and especially with physical geography and studying the earth, it tends to be very experiential. So, you know, Maria Montessori emphasized the importance of place and the importance of the land that the adolescent is on in that moment, and how that opens up the world of learning to them. So for certain things that we don't have access to on our middle school campus, as much as possible, we try to take them to a place where they can learn certain things through experience, through direct contact with different places. And so if we're studying, you know, the formation of cave systems in West Virginia, we go to a cave system and we crawl around through a cave system, which we did a few weeks ago, and it was fun and terrifying at the same time. And we were down there for about 4 hours, but a lot of fun. But they, in that process, they were able to tangibly learn about the formation of that aspect of the earth, and to really get to know it, and to do that as a community. We go to West Virginia and we learn about the formation of the Appalachian Mountains and how they have evolved and changed over centuries and centuries. And the effect of the New River, one of the oldest rivers in the world, cutting through those Appalachian Mountains. We do that by being in the mountains. We do it by being on the river. We do it by taking water out of the river and testing it for different qualities to see what's in it and what the properties are. So it is as experiential as possible. Also, talking about the scope of geography in this 2-year program. We usually start very, very local at the beginning of the year. So we start on our own campus on day 1. Students are going out on this whole school campus and focusing on what is available right here. What are the natural features of this land that we have immediate access to right now, and what can we do with it? What can we learn from it? Whether that's something to study or some work that we can do, or the arts, they come up with all kinds of ideas, but they silently go out and they study the land that we have access to right now. Early in the school year, you might see middle school students taking soil from our gardens and testing the soil for different properties, figuring out how we can amend the soil so that we can better grow the things that the students want to grow for food and for their business. You might see students early in the year, you'll probably see them doing this next week, or something similar at least, but even going out on our little pond back there in a rowboat to gather samples of water from the pond to test. So we start very local early in the year, and then by the end of the year, you would find middle school students exploring different areas, going national and even international in terms of their geographical learning. So, you might see them at Gettysburg, learning about how geography affected battle planning in the Civil War, or walking the streets of Manhattan and navigating lower Manhattan, trying to understand what it was like to be an immigrant coming into Manhattan through Ellis Island in the early 20th century and actually walking the paths that they walked and seeing the things that they saw. Or for some students, participating in the Model United Nations and actually representing and arguing about topics related to, this one is about the Great Lakes region in Africa, from the perspective of China. So a student wrote that and then ended up actually presenting the resolution for their committee at the podium of the United Nations. So we start very, very local. By the end of the year, it's very expansive in terms of what they are doing geographically and culturally and historically. Again, I already made this point, but geography in the middle school program for the adolescent is as experiential as humanly possible. That tends to be the way that they learn best. And when it can't be experiential in terms of place, when it is more in the classroom, geography becomes very, very much integrated into multiple disciplines all at the same time. And I'll just give you a brief case study of what this looks like in the middle school curriculum. And my example is, they did this last year. They read this relatively new novel called The Map of Salt and Stars last year, which is a novel about a young lady, an adolescent, I think she's 12 years old in the novel, who lives in New York City with her family, but they're from Syria, and they decide, this is in 2011, it takes place, they decide to go back to Syria to be with family there, and then the Syrian civil war breaks out. They have to leave Syria as Syrian refugees and come down through northern Africa and take a journey along a path where they end up in Spain. The whole time, this adolescent main character, this young lady, is telling a story to herself and to her siblings about a favorite story that was told to her by a family member of a young lady who lived in the Middle Ages from Spain, who had to dress up like a boy to work for a map maker, who is in the book is an actual famous medieval map maker. And she had to go on a journey to help him create a map of this region from Spain through northern Africa up to modern-day Syria. And so there are these two stories and two characters that are going opposite directions along this path around this region. So as they were reading this novel, they each took on a research project where they were researching the refugee crisis in the world, but focusing on different areas of the world and what is happening in terms of refugees and human migration. And so they were studying that, and they also created a map of this area that the novel takes place. And I brought just a few of these squares down here because I kept all the squares, but each student got a square like this and created actually you can go to the next slide, together created a large scale, it's probably a little bit larger than it's actually on this wall right now, but a large scale map putting all their squares together of the region of the novel that takes place. And once it was all made and they hung it up, they used pens and string and actually traced the route of the character in the novel. This mapping project, of course, it was partially an art project because there was painting involved and learning the color wheel and color mixing. And so there was art involved with that. There was math involved in this. Our math teacher, Amy Fagan, got involved because the map that you see here is a scale map. So she went through the math lessons necessary for them to learn how to scale down as they needed to for creating this map. Geographically, all of the weird colors that you see are very purposeful because they represent different elevations. So they were focusing on the topography of the area as well. So this whole mapping project involved art and math and literature and history, cultural studies, current events, all being woven together in one project so that they can see the interconnectedness of all of these different elements and aspects of life. And it just makes it more tangible to them, even though we can't necessarily go to Syria and Northern Africa and Spain and walk these paths ourselves. They're at least connecting with it tangibly through the creation of a representation of that area of the world and involving all of the disciplines to do that. And I believe that that is all that I have for you. Yes, and that's just another lovely picture.
So we began with a long Montessori quote, so I figured it would be appropriate to end with a long Montessori quote. So if cosmic education is Montessori's goal, or is the tool, what is the goal? Because Dr. Montessori always spoke of education not as an end to itself, but as a means to a peaceful world. And so all of this work in geography really, I think, is summed up in this goal, which is the harmony based on the need of each and all is of divine origin. That is why man has no conception of it and perceives only his own immediate needs. But if man could raise his consciousness to a higher level, he would awaken to be aware of the disinterested goodness and self-sacrifice of his fellows. If we educate children to see this, they will be ready themselves to feel gratitude towards all mankind. And this is an effective aspect of our cosmic education. So to me, this kind of sums up the purpose of this whole curriculum. And so thank you for coming out. And we saved some time for any questions. And then after questions, we would also encourage you to come on up and please touch, ask questions, and see closer any of the materials that we have. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ms. Laura alluded to the cards and a story experience to kind of impression experience to start in lower L. Is there anything of that nature in upper L that is used to kind of lay that foundation of this idea of the cosmic piece of it?
Yes, absolutely. So that story, the creation story, is told at every single level. So they will hear it every single year. And then, so that's always just kind of a framework within which we work. And then beyond that, I think at every single, no matter what the curriculum piece is, but also at every single level, I think we always try and start whatever lesson, especially if it's a broader lesson, with some type of story like that. So for instance, one thing that we'll do in Upper L is what we've called cosmic chats. So we might take a very specific thing, such as the Big Bang or particle physics or what are black holes, and we'll fit that within the larger story which they've already heard. Or for instance, right now the fourths are studying early humans. And so where does, we'll start with the story of where do early humans come from on the timeline of life. And a lot of this comes from linking the timelines together. So one timeline folds into another. So the timeline of life, at the very end of it, there's a 1 centimeter long red strip that is human history, right? Well, we'll start human history with that timeline, and then we'll roll out another timeline that's just that thin strip. Right, so from the very beginning, from that first creation story that Ms. Laura was talking about, all the other timelines, all the other curriculum fits into that first story. Any questions from? We have questions for each other.
I mean, this is just something that I've been smiling the whole way through, that we began in Children's House with the globe, land and water, and you went into a cave. And that happened through all of this, and just how beautiful Montessori takes that journey, allows that child to take that journey, and each level prepares the child for that next destination. And I don't know, that's just so beautiful that it's seen throughout the materials and captured in just the short talk tonight, but for the child, it's their whole experience with it. That's Montessori.
And one, not to toot my own horn or anything, but when I was looking at different early childhood education curriculum, when I was first setting out in my interest to become a teacher, there was nothing like this in any other early childhood education curriculum. This is really, really unique and special in the early childhood level to have this geography curriculum. I thought it was so cool. That's all.
Well, thank you all
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.